In the Championship, both games had 3 goals and both games were won by the away side, but we're going to start with the one that is more finely poised heading into the second leg. Sunderland went down to Coventry and they won 2-1. The Black Cats had famously lost their last 5 league games. They also have a dreadful record against Coventry over the years, but they had a game plan and they executed it rather well.
They did. Yeah, I mean, you see the team sheet. You see Isidore and Mayenda both starting rather than just one of them. You see Lefay and Roberts, all 4 of them, no doubt about it, attacking players. But it shows that just names on paper and what you see in front of you aren't always aligned, because that's an attacking lineup. It is still possible to play essentially a defensive, reactive game plan, but to benefit from what those players can do with a bit more space to play into. The 4-4-2 shape was the right way to go. I think Sunderland, in a weird way, might have benefited from losing 3-0 at the CBS a few months ago and finding out what Coventry can do, in particular Haji Wright streaking in behind, whether it's Thomas Asante and Sims playing up front, what they can do with a bit of space to play into. And so they didn't allow any of that in this game, and it was definitely the correct game plan. It also takes a few things to happen to make the game plan look like a genius game plan rather than, let's say, an unambitious game plan. And I think the narrative is set a little bit by the result, where had Sunderland lost 1-0 or drawn 0-0, had Daniel Ballard not been an absolute colossus, had Van Ewijk not given the ball away for Sunderland's winning goal, there might have been some negativity around Sunderland's approach. As it is, we can say that it was absolutely the right approach. And what we saw from Sunderland defensively is what I will remember from this game, particularly Ballard. But, you know, it'd be wrong to just focus on him. The whole of the back line, the goalkeeper, who I'd questioned in the preview and who was tested here, particularly with crosses, they all stood up really well to a lot of Coventry pressure. And as I'm sure we'll discuss as we go through the game, eventually they got it right on the break. I actually thought in the first half they didn't have loads of counter-attacking opportunities, and the ones that they did have, they didn't really execute as you would want. Mayenda and Isidore not quite on the same wavelength for one of the breakaways, maybe not quite getting that first or second pass right, and then eventually they do for the first goal. And you just can't beat a counter-attacking goal like that, can you?
Yeah, so let's talk about that first goal, because the game did sort of seem to explode into life in that second half. For me, I absolutely loved Dan Neal's forward pass into Enzo Lefay. I loved Lefay's through ball. It was an excellent run from Wilson Isidore. Obviously, bearing down on goal, gets his shot off. I think Ben Wilson possibly could have done a bit better, but it really was a fantastic goal. That was Wilson Isidore's first goal since mid-February, which does seem quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a player that I love. He's a player that when he was scoring got a lot of love on the pod. And Pod hasn't mentioned Wilson Isidore for the last few months. So that tells you how quiet he's been. Obviously lost his place to Mayenda. Justified starting in this game. He's just an interesting player from a striker profile point of view in the Championship, because he has a ton of the attributes that make basically the most attractive attributes for a modern Championship striker. He's got size and kind of awkward physicality, even if he's not necessarily he's not at all a target man, but he can be an attacking threat aerially inside the box with good movement and his height. But he's got such acceleration. He loves peeling wide. He's a kind of quite a nifty dribbler, quite an awkward dribbler. When he does get on the ball in wide scenarios, absolutely deadly in transition, as we saw during the regular season, particularly against Leeds, but also here, clearly with the goal. He also is not involved at all in the game at any point. If you look at the stats, I don't have them to hand, around Isidore's touches per match, passes per match, he is not involved whatsoever. So when he's not scoring, there is a big question about how much he's adding to the team, because he doesn't get on the ball from deep. He doesn't link play particularly. He is just that final action striker. And when the team is playing well and creating lots of those opportunities for him, and he's in form and confident in front of goal, it looks amazing. I thought there was an interesting tactical point I saw I think it was probably Lou Orns on Twitter, just talking about with Coventry, the way that they format the midfield in their build-up and in attacking play, with Grimes often dropping back into the back three, and Rodoni clearly always forward trying to play in front of the ball, is that actually in a game of cat and mouse like this, where one of the teams is clearly playing for counter-attacking opportunities and is inviting you on so that they can hit you on the break, it did provide problems for Coventry, where when they lost it, particularly for that first goal, where Bobby Thomas just plays into a trap. Thomas gallops forward. Sunderland are licking their lips at that point, because they know if they can mark the players in front of him, if they can force him into a risky pass, which is what happened, and if they win the ball back and he's out of position, suddenly they're in big trouble. And they didn't have the midfield bodies to cope with those second balls. So I thought that was an interesting tactical point that ended up playing out in that first goal. But that was it for me. It was Sunderland setting traps, Coventry falling into those traps, obviously, for both goals. And, Coventry putting a lot of pressure on, some pretty good build-up play, a lot of delivery into the box that was mixed and just didn't have that final moment, partly because of the incredible performance of Ballard and co at the back. I wasn't too impressed with how Coventry played after the Van Everijk mistake, after the 2-1 goal. I didn't think they did a huge amount to smash down the door, so to speak. We did have that incredible Joe Bellingham tackle, didn't we? When Haji Wright got on the ball finally inside the box and looked well placed. And there was Bellingham. It's like, of all the incredible genes that the Bellingham parents gave to their sons, one of my favourite is their ability to slide tackle, which is kind of an old school part of the game that not many players do, but both Bellinghams are incredible at timing slide tackles, extending their legs to poke the ball away, win the ball back. We saw it there in a massive moment.
To say, on the night, I was really impressed with Sunderland. I was really impressed with their organisation. I loved their physicality as well, because I think when you look at their team, you expect it from Ballard, you expect it from O'Nien, you expect it from Hume. But I thought the likes of Lefay and Patrick Roberts as well, they both put in a real shift. There was one point in the second half where Patrick Roberts won a really sort of meaty tackle, and that is not the sort of thing that I associate with him. When they went 1-0 up, it was looking like the classic away from home performance in the playoffs, soaking it up and then hitting Coventry on the counter-attack. But when they went 1-0 up, they just switched off for a split second, and it cost them, didn't it? Jack Rodoni stealing in his 7th goal in his last 11 games, his 6th header of the season as well. He is a really interesting profile of player, isn't he?
He really is. And I think when you watch what he does, which I would sum up quickly as pretty much everything, in terms of wanting to get on the ball and receive the ball from his defensive midfielders through the lines, wanting to move the ball out wide and combined out wide, generally out on the right-hand side with Van Everijk and Sakamoto, where that triangle of players is just unbelievably difficult to stop if they're all combining. They all have different ways of getting crosses in. But then somehow Rodoni, as well as doing all that, finds himself arriving late into the box, timing his run to get on the end of a lot of crosses. It's an incredible combination. I can't think of many current Championship players, or even ones I can remember off the top of my head from the last few years, that combine both of those things. You get the guys. Remember Josh Da Silva when Brentford went up? He was doing all of the first stuff that I'm talking about. They played with a central midfielder always going out wide, and those wide combinations so difficult to stop when you've got, as they had, Mbermo and players like that. But you never saw Josh Da Silva ending up really in the middle on the end of crosses and attacking crosses. It is genuinely amazing. And it was such an exciting few minutes, wasn't it? To have you're still catching your breath from that Sunderland breakaway goal. You're still hoping to see if you can get a good angle on a replay to work out if Isidore might have been a Nats offside. We never quite got that angle. That's fine. It was very, very close, regardless of what the actual answer was. And then, Sunderland having defended all of those crosses from the right-hand side, all of Sakamoto's balls in, all of Van Everijk's balls in, that is a bit of a numbers game, isn't it, crossing? And you can defend your box unbelievably well, and you can pack it with defensive players, as they did, and that was what repelled most of them. But it is a numbers game, and sometimes if there's a certain delivery, a certain flight of the ball, and a certain timing of a late run that's hard to pick up, and your centre-back's already marking the other attacking players, not a lot you can do. So it was an incredible few minutes, and, playoff football, there's so much to love about it. But when the Sky camera is genuinely rocking because the stadium is bouncing, that is just something that always gets the hairs on the back of your neck standing up.
Yeah, the atmosphere was absolutely superb. Unfortunately for the home fans, though, there was a sting in the tail, and it was quite a cruel sting in the tail for Milan Van Ewijk. What did you make of that goal? Because for me, obviously, Van Ewijk is at fault for the back pass, but I'm looking at Ben Wilson coming out of his goal with Mayenda one-on-one. I'm sort of thinking, I'm not a goalkeeper, so I may be wrong on this, but I'm thinking if you come out in that situation, dying minutes of the first leg of a playoff semi-final, if you come out, you have to take everything, or you stay in goal and you kind of make it harder for the striker. You make him have a little bit longer to think about it, maybe get a defender back in the mix as well. But yeah, unfortunately for Coventry, that didn't happen. Mayenda nips round Wilson and he puts it into the empty net. What did you make of it?
So on Wilson, I'm probably a bit more sympathetic than you. I definitely take your points. Certainly on the second point about either staying in goal or coming out, I think probably his hands are kind of tied there because he's probably out of his box anyway to receive that pass, and that's where you'd normally be as a keeper when the player's just inside your own half like that, to receive the pass that is clearly coming from Van Ewijk. And I think even at the point where Van Ewijk plays the pass, Wilson's expecting to come forward onto that pass, and he probably takes a beat to realise that he's just underhit it, by which point it all happens very quickly, and Mayenda's unbelievably quick. So I think on that front, I'm not sure there's much he could have done to be back on his line or any deeper back inside his own box realistically. And I think once you start backpedaling as a keeper, you're in all sorts of problems. But I do take your point about trying to just take Mayenda out. Again, it's easy to say, isn't it, with the benefit of hindsight, and these things do happen very quickly. I guess what I think is probably the case that we maybe don't appreciate so much is how nimble someone like Mayenda is, and how, by contrast, generally unagile and unnimble goalkeepers are by comparison. I think, if he was as agile as Mayenda, then you can kind of dance on your feet, and when he knocks it around you, you can get across, you can slide in, you can rugby tackle him, whatever you need to do. I think the reality is Mayenda's little hesitation just throws you off balance and doesn't give you the power to kind of to make those movements across. So I'm maybe a bit less sympathetic about Wilson, but there's no doubt at all, going back to the first goal, that Coventry's goalkeeper situation might define their season if they do fall short, if they do get knocked out at the Stadium of Light. It's a disastrous situation to head into the playoffs without your first team keeper, who had just become a really good goalkeeper after you'd put quite a lot of time and patience into his adaptation in Dovin. Lose him to injury, bring in who you think is second choice, which is Collins, only for him to flap at everything and have no confidence or not give any confidence to the team, and then bring in Wilson, and he hasn't made a positive impact either. It's obviously a big issue for Lampard and Coventry. There's not really much they can do about it at this point. But yeah, the mistake was Van Ewijk's. Not really much you can say about it, is there? He looks up, the pass is telegraphed. He should expect Mayenda to see that and gamble, which he did. And you just have to get a better connection on it. And there is that thing, isn't there, about counter-attacking game plans, is you think it's tiring for the defensive team to be out of possession and defending their box for the whole game. You think that they're the ones that should get tired out and maybe a little looser as the game goes on. But I think there's an aspect to which the attacking team constantly being in possession, constantly having to make the right decisions with your passes and make sure you don't give the ball away because you know that that's what the opposition will want you to do. I think that comes with a certain fatigue as well, and clearly that impacts both decision making and, in this case, execution, with Van Ewijk on his weaker foot just getting it wrong, and that's what sends them back to the Stadium of Light, with Sunderland in an unbelievable position. Not just level, which they'd have bitten your hand off for, but ahead. And I think, Matt, from a tactical point of view, this is absolutely fascinating, because if you are Regis Lebris, getting a ton of credit, understandably, for his game plan here, what do you do with a game state heading back home that you probably didn't expect? So, like, Sunderland would have expected to go back home needing to win the game, probably, maybe, if the scores were level, and playing as they would be most comfortable to play in front of their home fans in order to do so, where you'd expect them to be able to take the game a bit more to Coventry, and for Coventry to be a little less confident because their away form isn't so good. Instead, Sunderland have something to defend. So do you take the same approach, go for the 4-4-2, deep block, compact out of possession, hit Coventry on the counter-attack, knowing that they are going to be committing men forward as they did, they are going to be open and vulnerable on the break? It sounds great, and it sounds like, I think in a vacuum, the right way to go. However, will 49,000 Sunderland fans, absolutely jacked up Sunderland fans, going balmy, will they be able to handle the nerves of that game plan? Because it's it's one thing celebrating every block and header and clearance from the away end when you can see why the manager has gone for that. I think it's a little bit harder when you're expecting your team to be a bit more dominant at home. And if they do play like that and Coventry take the lead and score the first goal, because a Sakamoto cross finds Hadji right at the back post and they go ahead in the game, level in the tie, what do you do then? Can you just switch and go back to a more expansive style of play, committing men forward, a bit more expansive in possession, taking more risks? Or do you have to stick with what you're doing, in which case the place gets very nervy indeed? So, I don't think this tie is over at all. Clearly, the first goal is going to be absolutely crucial. But I do think for Lebris, there's a fascinating decision to make. And as with all tactical decisions that managers make in playoff scenarios, it'll live and die by the result. And we will pretty much retrospectively fit our opinion on whether he was right or wrong to do whatever he chooses, based on whether they get through to the final or whether Coventry come back. And yeah, last word for Ballard, because it's one of the most iconic central defensive performances that I can remember. And Lebris should take a lot of credit, because that was a brave team selection. I don't think many people expected Ballard to come back in. He missed 12 games with a hamstring injury and then played half an hour on final day. You have to have a lot of belief in a player that they can get through a game like this with so much defensive responsibility as he had, and to take out a player in Mepham who's obviously has a big status at this level and has been a very good player at the level, even if in the last few weeks things haven't looked quite right. So brave call from Lebris, paid off. Loads of brave calls from Lebris, all paid off. He's kind of the star man here, along with Ballard. And we head into the second half. The second leg rather. Just absolutely cannot wait for this one.
Just finally on this tie, set pieces. I thought Sunderland were really inventive from their attacking set pieces, and I also thought that they defended Coventry's threat really well, because we all know how good Coventry are at scoring from these dead ball situations. But ultimately, they're going to have to do it all over again at the Stadium of Light, aren't they? As we said, this one is set up beautifully for that second leg. Of course, that was the Friday night game. As for the Thursday night game, Sheffield United beat Bristol City 3-0 at Ashton Gate. It was Bristol City's first appearance in the playoffs since 2008. There was a cracking atmosphere inside the ground. Blades thought they'd gone 1-0 up, but Tyrese Campbell's goal was ruled out for offside. Joe Williams hit the bar before he had to go off injured. And then, in added time at the end of the first half, Rob Dickie brought down Kiefer Moore. Oliver Langford gave the penalty and he sent off the Bristol City defender. Liam Manning, one of the most mild-mannered head coaches on the circuit, called the decision a disgrace. I know that you don't like to get bogged down in refereeing decisions on this podcast, but this one had a massive impact on both the game and the tie as a whole. What did you make of it?
Correct decision and good refereeing, and absolutely no reason why you should worry about whether it makes a tie less interesting or whether the decision itself is going to give an advantage to the opposition. That's not how it works, unfortunately. This There have been a few incidents over the course of the playoff semi-final first legs. There have been loads of ref chat, right? And I don't really mind it particularly when we're at this stage of the season and there's only so many games to talk about. It is clearly, and where the results are, unbelievably important. It's a bit different to a normal Monday pod in a season, isn't it, where we've got 3 leagues worth of stories to tell, and I don't really see the point in dwelling too long on refereeing decisions. Many of them, the people who are listening and watching haven't even seen, so I just don't think it's very interesting content. I think it's a bit different when it comes to these big occasions, because refereeing decisions do have a big impact on the game, just like this one did. I know sometimes I probably come across like an absolute nerd and a bit of a bore, to be honest, but like when it comes to referee discourse, I do refer back to the rules, or the laws, as people call them, as much as possible, because I think you can show yourself to be really ignorant and quite stupid if you just shout about something that you think to be wrong when actually you're wrong. If you don't know what the laws of the game are, I don't really see the point in getting really wound up about refereeing decisions, and this is a great example of that. So the foul itself is Dickie pulling back more with both hands on both shoulders. The fact that Dickie then kicks the ball after that action makes no difference. It's a foul because he has pulled back the player. That is very, very clear in any area of the pitch that is a foul. The fact that it's a red card is because it's very, very clear in the laws that if there's an obvious goal scoring opportunity, clearly that was, it's a red card if you are holding, pulling, pushing the attacking player. He's clearly pulling the attacking player, so it's clearly a red card. It's clearly a foul. It's clearly a penalty. It ruins the spectacle, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision. When it comes to Bristol City fans and Liam Manning, I understand it way more than a neutral fan. If it is in the heat of the moment and you've been waiting for this game for 15 years or whatever it is, I kind of get it, and I'm not hugely critical of thinking that it's an error. I'm sure in the cold light of day, most people would realise that it wasn't. But yeah, I just think it's been a weekend of referee discourse. A lot of decisions were made that were wrong. Lots of decisions were made that were completely right and still got criticised.
Yeah, and I think that is very fair, because as a neutral, sitting on my sofa on Thursday night, taking in the game, the first playoff game, really looking forward to it, really looking forward to the tie. I didn't want this to be a penalty and a red card, but just because I didn't want it to be doesn't mean that it wasn't, because it was a penalty, it was a red card, and obviously that has massive implications, not just for that game, but for the tie as a whole. Harrison Burrows tucks away the penalty. Sheffield United score 2 more goals in the second half. They turn the screw. They have a 3-0 lead heading into the second leg. What did you make of that second half performance? And in particular, what did you make of Callum O'Hare's goal? A unique goal.
Yeah, unique goal. And a lovely dummy when the ball came across from Burrows for the second goal as well, which I really appreciated. Takes a defender out of the game and opens up more of an opportunity for Brooks to score. So yeah, two quality moments from O'Hare. His goal, I still can't quite get my head around, and I think there's a 20% chance that ends with a broken ankle. And yet, the deft flick that he gets on the ball as he lands, having jumped up in the air, is unique goal, quite remarkable. Absolutely loved it. Bristol City by this point, were gone, weren't they? And having 10 men, there's mitigating circumstances. I don't want to criticise the defending too much when you have a player less and you're already behind. It is what it is, but it was obviously pretty disastrous and doesn't give them much of a chance of reaching Wembley. I do think it's worth pointing out, I've got a bit bogged down in the laws of the game, talking about the red card, but, it reflected how the game looked in the first half as well. Sheffield United weren't scintillating by any means. They were still the better side. They were still creating opportunities every now and then. And, by the time Burrows scores the penalty in injury time in the first half, the shot count is 7-3 in favour of Sheffield United, and they've had the better chances within that. So although you've got Williams hitting the bar from range, which would have been an absolutely brilliant goal with what was Bristol City's first shot of the game after 15 minutes, it's not like they were playing very well. They looked a little bit how I expected them to look. Having done the research on them in the preview, I was less confident than I was before I dug a bit deeper. Just this feeling that they went into it a bit undercooked. a lot of it is down to absences and the limits that Manning has with the players that he has available. They just don't have as many good players. They don't have as many good attacking players. Dickie and the other centre-backs really struggle with Kiefer Moore and the players around him. I don't think Moore looks anything like peak Kiefer Moore right now, and certainly not in front of goal where he looks really lacking confidence. But the goal just showed what he offers, even if he's not scoring goals, as a focal point. It's kind of funny that it was him running onto a flick on rather than the other way around. But even that, I think, reflects that he's always going to drag centre backs towards him because he is such a focal point, and it does just create more space for the other attacking players. So it can be absolutely no arguments from my point of view with the red card, with the penalty, with the final score. This was unfortunately a mismatch that was made even more so by an error from Dickie, which got the punishment it deserved. And Sheffield United, perfect scenario really, without having to play unbelievably well, was still way too much to handle, and I think it reflected the gap between the two teams. So I don't have much of a preview for the second leg because I think Sheffield United, they actually don't mind a game where they have to soak up a bit of pressure because of the opportunities it gives their front four on the counter-attack, where Harmer is just such a brilliant passer in terms of counter-attacking, where they have wide players who can streak clear down the sides. They have Moore, they have Campbell, who's a great finisher when he gets chances. It's going to be unbelievably difficult for Bristol City with the absences that they have as well.
My final thoughts on this one and the Championship first legs. Shout out to Ollie Arblaster for wearing that bright yellow fleece so the Sky cameras can easily spot him in the away end. And also, I need to mention Chris Wilder at the end of the game because he makes a point of ushering his players towards the away end and then very, very quickly running over to them and pushing them all back in, sort of saying, in, basically saying, this tie is not won yet. We know we need to finish off the job. It was just a classic bit of Chris Wilder management. And also, just on the ties in general, those first legs, two teams winning away from home, playing a variation of 4-4-2. Now, I'm not about to go all Mike Bassett on you, but they were variations of 4-4-2, weren't they? They weren't rigid, but they were modern variations of 4-4-2. As a tactics man, what did you make of that?
I love it. I just love it because it's, sometimes a trend in football, in a league or in English football as a whole, sometimes a trend is established for a year or two and you genuinely think to yourself, it's going to be like this forever, isn't it? And in Championship terms, we had that with the three at the back era from about 3 or 4 years ago, where 2/3 of teams in the league were playing three centre-backs and wing-backs, and it made for an absolutely horrendous footballing product. At the top level, it's the pepification of the game, right? And that has obviously had a big drip-down effect into the EFL. But actually, in the same way that in the Premier League, there's now an antidote to it, kind of what Pep has flagged up this season as the kind of Iraola style, the Arsenal style, if you like, which isn't very peppy at all. In the same way in the Championship, things do actually just change quite quickly. Last season we had Leicester and Southampton playing that kind of way. Haven't really had any teams playing with that extremely slow, territorial build-up style in the Championship. So, no, I love it. And by the same token, there's a period where everyone's playing, with an extra body in the centre of the park or an extra player in the back line, and most teams are playing one up front, where you just think, okay, well, this is how we can expect it to look going forward. And then top teams at the level in massive games are playing, as you say, a 4-4-2. In basic terms, I think that's really, really exciting because it just shows how quickly things change and how adaptable managers and recruitment departments need to be. Because it used to be this real buzzword of sporting directors was recruiting to a style of play, and now you're a bit well, actually, mate, if the league's going to change to this extent every year, is that the right way of going about things, or do you sometimes end up looking a bit outdated quite quickly? So it's a great point you raise. It's brilliant. It'd be really interesting to see if Sunderland and Sheffield United meet at Wembley, to see how both teams will approach it.